Hey, I've got a great story for you today. It's a true story. It sounds like a parable because there are two men, but this is a true story that happened right here in the United States. It starts after World War II with a guy, I'm going to just use his initials of ST. He starts a restaurant with his two brothers. And then they start a second restaurant in Atlanta near a Ford factory. Well, tragedy strikes. One of the restaurants burns to the ground and he has no insurance. I mean, this sets him back big time. Well, ST is a faithful man of God. He's a deacon at his Southern Baptist church. He's tithing on all of his income. He even has his restaurant closed on Sundays so that he and his employees can go to church. Then, just when things couldn't get any worse, his two brothers who are in partnership with him die in a plane accident. He finds himself at rock bottom, but he just keeps showing up to work every day, working his hardest, doing his best, continues being faithful in his church, continues tithing, and tithing not only his money, but his time by closing his business on Sundays when Sunday's a pretty good business day for restaurant owners. Well, fast forward and the Atlanta mall opens up and he talks the manager of the mall into renting him a 300 square foot space. And in that space, he starts to sell these fried cuts of meat that he's actually getting from Delta Airlines because when their meat cutlets come in for their trays for their airplane passengers, a certain percentage of them are too big. So he buys those at discount, fries them up with a certain family recipe, and with his location at the mall, he does the same thing. It's closed on Sunday, and he tithes 10% of all the income. Now that guy, ST, well, the T is for Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A. And that's the start of Chick-fil-A, the most profitable restaurant chain in the world and the largest privately owned, never went public, never had investor money, just family-owned restaurant chain. Now, I want to give you a comparison here because Chick-fil-A in 2024 did annual revenue of $10.5 billion. In contrast is Popeye's chicken. Now, here's what's interesting. Popeyes started about the same time. Chick-fil-A started in Atlanta. Popeyes started in New Orleans. They both sell fried boneless chicken, very similar product. They both franchise, very similar model. Popeyes should be more profitable, right? Because Popeyes has never tithed the 10%, and Popeyes is open 7 days a week. So between the tithe and being closed 15% of the time on a most profitable day, you're probably talking about a 30% difference. Popeyes should be 30% more profitable every year. Then you compound that over a decade, then over decades, Popeyes should be worth a lot more. Well, Chick-fil-A does $10.5 billion of revenue every year. How much does Popeyes do? Just $1 billion. Chick-fil-A actually does more profit every year, over $1 billion of profit, cash profit, than Popeyes does in total revenue. Why? How? Because a man of God faithfully said, I'm going to tithe from the start when it's hard. I'm going to keep God above all. And even in his sacrifice of saying, what does Christ above all look like for me? He said, for me, it means I'm closed on Sunday so I can go to church and I want workers who are in church as well. Reminds me of 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, where scripture says this, eye has not seen, nor has ear heard, nor have it entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. When Truett Cathy was standing in front of the charred remains of his burnt down diner and his two brothers had died in a plane crash and he's got one restaurant and he can't pay the bills, but he's still choosing to show up at church, teach Sunday school, tithe, be closed on Sundays, could he ever have imagined that within decades, he would have an empire that brings in $1 billion of cash profit every year? Eye has not seen, ear has not heard the things which God has prepared for those who love him. Do you realize that when you surrender your life to God, everything you have, it doesn't restrain you from your best life. It launches you into your best life. Let's look again at that last phrase there. The things which God has prepared for those who love him. That's our theme in this series, Christ above all. Jesus, I love you above all. I wonder if Truett Cathy had not loved God, I suspect Chick-fil-A would not be that much more successful than Popeyes. They very similar work ethic of the founders, very similar model. I believe it's God's blessing that has amplified. Think about that. He always gave 10 to 30% back to God, probably more as his wealth increased, and then God just multiplied it. Here's what I want you to think about. That Greek word, things God has prepared for you, is this idea of people who go ahead of a king and they're paving the road ahead of the king. Do you know that in your life, when you're walking the road of life, around every turn, God is already there? And when you choose a lifestyle of loving God, it keeps you on his path for you. I'm convinced that most American Christians are missing out on things God has prepared for them because they're not walking the path of loving him. The only way for you to discover and realize the best things that God has already prepared for you are by walking on the path of choosing to love him day by day. And that's what we mean by Christ above all. Now, if it's really Christ above all, then we surrender to God. Is the great things you have prepared for me, are they in this life or are they in the next life? That's up to God. But let's be like S. Truett Cathy. Let's be like King David. And let's say, God, I'm going to love you every day. I'm going to walk your path for my life, trusting that you are ahead of me. And there are things around the corner you've prepared for me that my eyes have never seen and my ears have never heard and my imagination could never even come up with. See you tomorrow.